Thank you very much. It's almost like they planned this with having a bunch of resilience things together and then a security person. So I'm going to make you guys work for a minute. First of all, if you've got any AI transcription devices, I apologise, I'm going to break them. I come from the north of Scotland and single days is quite strong. So as a show of hands, how many people here are involved with the Telecoms Security Act, TSA? Okay, keeping your hands up. How many of you believe that you're compliant to this, which is the Telecommunications Security Act 2021? Okay, so that's quite interesting here. How do I do this? I've got clickers here as well, okay. Right, so I think before we start on this, we have to cover what the TSA is and actually isn't, because I hate the term TSA. The reason why I hate the term TSA is, whilst I have to give this back to Julian afterwards, and it's the first time I've seen it in physical paper, it's a mirage, it's an illusion. The reason why I say this is because the law has got nothing to do with the TSA anymore. The TSA has done its job. It amended the Communications Act 2003. And when I agreed to do this presentation, I didn't also realise I was going to be giving you a forewarning of what's going to happen with the Cybersecurity Resilience Bill. For those who have read the bill is going to become the Cybersecurity and Resilience Act 2026. And it's going to amend the Network and Information Systems NIS regulations 2018. I've actually, for those who watched, I left halfway through to join a Tech UK briefing this morning. And apparently the structural reasons for that is Brexit meant we couldn't update it. Yay! So the important thing here is the duties for providers of public communications networks or services were defined within the amended Communications Act, which was then supported by a set of regulations, which came into force October 22. This actually is a really important date because any service that supports a public communications network or service after that date has to comply with the law. Obviously, the law applies to all providers, not just Tier 1 and Tier 2, excluding micro enterprises, but also anything connected to the new stuff, unless you could prove it had no impact, and it also had to comply. Now, when we talk about resilience here, it's interesting, Tony, talking about redefining resilience. I would say if I was to ask most people what resilience means here, we'll get about 6 or 7 different versions. We've heard the resilience on can a network continue to operate and deliver service to a customer? That's pretty much redundancy. It's what I would call the skeleton of resilience. But when you talk about the DNA, the cognition, the behaviors, this is more what Julian was talking about this morning. When it's how does an organization understand itself? How does it understand what's really important? And with the greatest of respect to you guys, your customers need to understand what they need to do. It's great you guys are delivering networks, but at some point somebody will complain because something didn't work. This is where the guidance on managing resilience risks, which came out from Ofcom, almost silently, the same time as the Code of Practice came out in December 22, and it's been amended again in September 2024. What that resilience guidance is about you understanding the risks to your network, showing that as we move off the copper phone, we can still maintain some of the actual distributed networking for up to 4 hours using battery power because we're reliant more on IP connectivity. But equally, if you look at the bottom bit, what everybody is calling the TSA today, it's merely guidance on managing cyber risks, admittedly laid before Parliament, and it applies to providers of public communications networks or services with greater than £50 million relevant turnover. Came into force December 2022, but it is just guidance. If you look at the amended Communications Act, just because you don't comply with something in the Code of Practice doesn't mean to say you're going to get a penalty. Indeed, anybody who was sharp enough to see what happened to BT when they admitted they had a problem with 999, there was a penalty levied, not using the Code of Practice, using Regulation 9, which sits within the regulations. And then this picture has become even more complex because if you're Tier 1, Tier 2, you're reporting back to Ofcom using the S135 reporting mechanism, being given additional guidance, which your tier 3s and altnets, neutral host providers, which make up the majority of my customer base, don't see. They then respond back, and then that has caused an awful lot of the problems that we'll talk about in a minute. Okay? We've also got what I call the 5 phases of TSA. And the reason why I do this, because this has become part of the reporting that we use for customers, because the dates that people talk about, I hate them. And part of the reason why I hate them is these dates are what I would deem to be an evidenced by date. This is when you're expected to be able to show evidence. Anybody involved in the S135 regime will tell you, you usually get asked 3 questions per technical guidance measure. Are you doing it? What policy supports that? And where you're not doing that, what else are you doing? How's that okay? Which we don't actually replicate down to our supply chain, which is a big challenge. But the reason why I talk about this, so phases 1 and 3, if you're a tier 2 provider, you had to be able to evidence by 2025. A tier 1 had to do phase 1 by 24 with phase 3 in 25. But the reason why I've drawn what would usually be seen as being the supply chain stuff, spanning a bunch of phases, is because you had to be ready to actually take on new suppliers and assess supply chain risk by the first deadline. Okay? This is an important thing that an awful lot of people actually forget. And this is actually seen. S135 regime has been a pivoting away from these evidence by dates towards reacting to what the regulator's saying. It's the reason why I'm seeing my clients especially start to be asked a bunch of supply chain questions over the last 4 or 5 months, because people have pivoted to reacting to what the regulator is stating rather than what they have to do by law. So what are the key areas that people miss? Well, we have already talked about the issues. I mean, as I said, Julian's talked about it this morning, about when you're talking about resilience and things like that, well, what are your key services? How do they behave? What's the cognition? What's the DNA behind them? And whilst we're very, very good within TSA programs at recognising security critical functions, although that definition has changed from the TSRs to the TSA, and network oversight functions, we actually forget the colour. And when we're looking at these things here, information assets are what actually provide context to your assets. It's all very well knowing where you've got a piece of networking kit, where you've got a server that supports it, whatever, but what's actually in it? Who actually cares about it? And actually, out of the 19 obligations in total, only 9 are within the technical guidance measures. What I see time and time again, we are at the end of 4 years worth of TSA stuff now. And I still see people sitting in the technical guidance measures. They're continually surprised by what they actually have to do by law, in part because of what Ofcom's asked them to do. Okay? Again, when you look at things like traffic data, that network and user data, if you report back to Ofcom, you had to identify it in the first S135 and revisit that in the third. These are things why it's okay not to have been okay at the beginning. It's all about managing your gaps. But also looking here as well, you've got governance structures and plans, design documentation. Sometimes still isn't available when you go and ask people, because people are busy building the network. They're actually reliant on what's in the CMDB or some asset register or something else. But as we've seen with the failures of JLR, M&S, the co-op over the past few months, actually resilience failures at scale don't happen just because of a cyber event. They happen because you haven't taken the time to understand yourself. You haven't taken the time to stop continually surprising yourself by saying, well, we've got all the right security stuff here, but we still have failures. Okay, so it's all about being honest with yourself. And remember, 10 of those are not in those technical guidance measures. Okay? Then brings us on to the key risks to be reviewed annually, which sit in Regulation 11B. I think I've seen one provider, and I deal with Tier 1, Tier 2, and a range of Tier 3. I've only seen one organisation before I've come in there, and some of them have had some of the largest consultancies in the UK with them. even understanding what Regulation 11B was. These are important because it's all about managing security compromise. And you can see the types of things it's talking through here. And one of the key things is security compromise happening due to the activities of third parties. But one of the key things here is, when we talk about security compromise, and we go back to the resilience context, it was something highlighted by Ofcom in the resilience guidance December 2022, but because it wasn't part of the telecommunications security framework microsite, very few people read it. It's clear that security compromise isn't just a failure of cyber. It's a failure of being able to control the service, the data, or the system, and or protect its availability, okay? This is not just a cyber thing. This is not just security. It's sécurité en français, safety, rather than security in a pure play sense. And this is where, remember, the first penalty using the new powers was a failure of resilience, Regulation 9, okay? Records management. When you read here, right, only 21 of the obligations relating to be able to prove it. Because remember, you've got to do your risk assessment, you've got to work out your scope, you've got to show how you have identified the gaps and how you're moving forward on this journey. Okay, this is what it is, it's a journey. Exactly the same as the Cybersecurity Resilience Act is going to be a journey. It is not the end point. This is a journey as well. So look, only 21 of the records that you have to maintain by law are captured in the technical guidance measures. If you're not looking outside, if you're not looking holistically, so in the event that you have an incident, and Ofcom comes knocking, they can and they will ask you to show you're working, ask you to prove what you're actually doing. These records cover, obviously, the annual risk assessments that we've talked about before, which have to be retained for 3 years. Your access records, sensitive data management, third-party access and operational continuity. And that's where anybody involved in the current round of S135 will see that some things in M10, which was only about supply chain, right? Not. What it's actually doing is asking you now to prove how you manage your vulnerabilities above CVSS 7 from the starting evidence date. Tier 1, that's 2024. Tier 2, March this year. But they're asking you now to show how you imagine all of your vulnerabilities, not the stuff in suppliers or whatever, okay? They're asking you to show the working set for any new contract from that start evidence date. How are you doing it? What are the mechanisms in place? So these people who've been reading lines in a spreadsheet and starting to pivot towards different things without reading the law are going to come unstuck. And then we come on to governance. And this is, remember, this is not a cyber regime. It's a governance first framework. When you talk to Ofcom, when you talk to Jeremy McQuaid, he's quite clear on that one, because this is one of the things I fed back early last year, that people were treating us like PCI DSS, okay? You have to look within Annex C, and within there, 22 of those indicators of good practice, of which there are 70 to be achieved, have to be read as if they were security critical functions. Now that's changing in the current consultation where they have pivoted the scope, but I have fed this back to the NCSC. But you can see here again, only 9 of these governance requirements sit in the guidance measures. Look at all these ones that sit outside of it. It's very much the technical guidance measures. If that's all you're sitting in, you are going to come unstuck. And it's important to start reading through these, okay? Then you've got the provider requirements and the supply chain measures. I've already alluded to what I'm seeing at the present minute in time within my customer base. A raft of M10, everybody wanting to be special, either spurious contracts, including what for me is the biggest gotcha here, is suppliers must commit to privileged access workstations when the industry has not even worked out what they look like yet, okay? There are an awful lot of things that's been pushed out there thinking you can put everything into contracts, okay? But that isn't how this works. How this actually works here is about making sure that the provider understands what risks it has. Remember the risks I've talked about today. And this actually comes back to what we're talking about when it comes to resilience. We've talked about it's not just that skeleton in terms of the actual the network, how it's supposed to work, where your choke points are. Tony's already mentioned people want single connectivity, etc. It is very much about working out why you need to do things. Be comfortable with the reasons why you're doing what you're doing, but also ensure that you're very open and honest with yourself about the scope. Start somewhere. Don't try to get everything. As I said, I mean, I'm speaking to vendors just now who think that they've missed the boat, and they're surprised when I tell them, well, after 4 years, Tier 1 providers, after spending significant amounts of money, still don't really understand to any level of detail their network or user assets or their system assets, especially as we head towards virtualization, because it's still seen as techie stuff. When we come into secure procurement and configuration, we've got the vendor security assessment, but the vendors are quite clear with us that we are merely an island off the coast of Europe. Why are they going to invest the time to actually work more of this? And this is actually going to get worse as we head towards the Cybersecurity Resilience Act. Because if you've got a supplier who you're actually a vendor or an MSP and they're regulated underneath their own law, and you come to them and you say, well, I want to be special. I'm one of 15 organizations who all want their own answer and who all want their own stuff. Where are they going? They're going to go to where they're going to get fined for not doing what a competent authority says. But it is really important to talk through here. It's about you ensuring that what you're asking for is actually meets a common set of requirements, but also how you configure them. Now, this is something that if you look here, the stages of MAP and shared responsibility don't neatly align to the implement or the evidence dates, but there's a reason for that. Because if you try implementing your agreements and oversight without understanding what it is you want in those agreements and oversight, you're just wasting time. So it is important to be clear with yourself, what do you need people to do? Because I can assure you, I have seen firsthand, I'm obviously not going to say who, but I have seen firsthand suppliers crossing their fingers to go and get a framework agreement. And the reason why I know that is because I've looked through the agreements from my own customers, and I'm like, you can't sign up to that, that's unreasonable. And straight away I'm seeing organizations of a similar size, outlets and neutral host providers, falling over themselves to sign framework agreements. So, and actually this is what I'm seeing with Tier 1s and Tier 2s just now. They're starting to feel this. They're starting to see there's something in the air here. But because this can't be that easy. And this will only come a cropper when there is a significant incident. And we've seen how easy this can be. I didn't realize until recently that the North Sea in some areas is only 50 meters deep. You don't even need to be a sat diver to go that deep, and that's where some of the cables are bailing. So it's the likelihood of having an outage which impacts you. And we've seen this morning with the discussions from RIPE, how easy it would be outsourcing to South Africa, outsourcing to the Asian continent, where we're outsourcing all of our knowledge and effort and things like that. That is all going to places which are already proven to be fragile. And then we're pushing cloud. The interesting thing I have found is that an awful lot of the TSA charter have stopped on Tuesday, predominantly because Cloudflare went down, which meant that AI didn't work, which was quite funny. And the CSRA stuff, the CSRB stuff stopped as well. But this shows how trying to create your agreements and showing that you've got oversight of those agreements is impacted by making sure that your risk assessment's right, making sure that you democratize and work with your suppliers to say, I want to come up with this answer, help me. Where do you think you impact me? Okay? And then it's quite interesting as well, because I've seen one particular provider who stopped at stage 3, stopped at the M10s. So actually, I'm definitely not going to tell you who they are, but you can see their agreement on their website. But they haven't looked about making the supply chain resilient. Ensuring that you've got enough knowledge internally to continue to operate your network, making sure that you understand what's going to happen in the increasingly likely event of global connections going down through anchor drags or whatever. So this is the final slide because I forgot to put a question slide up. And I know that we've been running a little bit late with some of this stuff. But has anybody got any questions?
Any questions? Yep.
Regarding the actual law, when you're talking about providers that have to subscribe to it, which subscribers exactly have the legal obligation to follow the law in this case?
Providers of public communications networks and services, unless they are a micro enterprise. Now, remember, the law is not this. I'm going to buy you an Amended Communications Act, by the way, Julie. Okay. The law is the Amended Communications Act and the Electronic Communications Security Act Regulations 2022. Those are the only two laws in town. Everything else is things that will be read by a court or tribunal in the event that the regulator wishes to take you to court. And they will be made aware of that.
So what I'm thinking of here is someone who's runs a web hosting organization that has no particular public telecommunications utility, for example. Are they subject to this law or just part of it or whatever?
As ever, it depends, but unlikely. I mean, I think one of the most interesting ones is if you're McDonald's, other fast food places are available, and Wendy's is so much better. But when they're white labeling O2 Wi-Fi, who becomes the provider in that instance? And I think that those aren't the discussions we're getting to yet, if I'm being honest with you, because the biggest challenge I'm seeing right now is people are still treating this like a security compliance thing. And they are reacting rather than understanding how the organization operates. It goes back to what everybody said, but especially Julian, with what he's been adding, that DNA and behavior and cognition on top of that skeleton. I would say most providers still aren't there yet. And this is the reason why I'm seeing cut and paste things from regulations, some consultant spreadsheet that he's collected over time and sending things out, just hoping that it's actually going to work.
Does it seem a bit ISO 9000, some of this law?
So, yes, but that's not a bad thing. The reason why I say it's not a bad thing is the reason being is, if you want prescription, be careful what you wish for. We've already seen this with, I mean, we had this discussion on the Tech UK call this morning, talking about, well, why can't we just point out to areas of the cyber assessment framework? Well, because it's a point in time reference. But when you're trying to build legislature on top of something, you have to be able to point to something. And I think that allowing somebody to say, this is what we expect you to do, but we expect you to be able to govern, that's actually been the bit that's fallen down, because I'm the co-author of the last CAST, author of Health and Social Care Network Compliance Operating Model. So I was the UK's second BSW 799 certification, there you go, with Britannic money. And I don't see a problem with being quality-based as long as it's got a reference point. And actually, if people were to read the Code of Practice in its entirety, it has the regulations. It has all the things that people need to do. And if they were to underpin their governance with that, things would be a lot better. This is one of the things I said to Ofcom last year. If you want to build this properly, you have to measure the governance. Are they genuinely being open and honest with themselves? Because that's the potential from this.
Any more questions? No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh.